University. So first, let me request Professor David Throop of George Washington University to come on, please. Please listen to him very carefully. Pay attention as Professor David Throop addresses you for 5 minutes, followed by the others. Thank you.
Gentlemen, I only met Jaramogi once when he was campaigning to honor him. I think you can divide his career into 6 phases. First, the period of his education at Masino, the Alliance High School, Makerere, and then back to teach at Masino. And that period demonstrated, I think, his willingness to stand up and challenge authority in 2 famous confrontations with Carrie Francis. First as a pupil at Masino, and then just before he went to Makerere over Carrie Francis's appointment as the new headmaster of the Alliance High School. The second period is, I think, extremely important and underestimated. And that is the period from 1945 until he was elected to the Legislative Council in 1957, when he revived, along with Walter Odede and Achieng Oneko, the Luo Union, and played a pivotal role in the formation of Rutatco, the Luo Thrift and Trading Corporation. And it was during these years, 1945 to 1957, that he really captured the influence over the Luo community. First, as representative of the emerging Luo elite, but also representing the voice of the have-nots of Kisumu, and perhaps most importantly, as the spokesman of the Luo peasantry. It was his critique of soil conservation measures and stocking and cattle dipping, I think, in the 1940s and 1950s, defending traditional peasant principles that catapulted him into the position of Gur and leader of the Luo community, a position that in many respects he was to hold until his death in 1994. The third phase, and the one that we will know about, but which I'm going to talk about perhaps in a little more detail, echoing Michael Chege, is the period of the struggle for KANU, the struggle from his election to the Legislative Council in 1957 until he resigns as Vice President of KANU and Vice President of Kenya to form the Kenya People's Union in 1966. 1958, as has been mentioned, is a pivotal year, pivotal speech, when he says that the real leader of the Kenyan nationalist movement is Jomo Kenyatta, and that the rest of us sitting here in the Legislative Council are really merely his representatives. And Kenyatta has to be released to play his rightful role in Kenyan politics. But that relationship became tested. And as early as January 1964, it was already evident at the time of the Lynette coup in the KAR that Kenyatta had become a little bit more suspicious of ODINGA, of the Jaramogi. And that concern, that suspicion, grew at the end of the year on Jamhuri Day, December 1964, when the Kenyan African Democratic Union disbanded, was incorporated into KANU, and changed the balance of ideological forces within the ruling party. The 12th of December 1964, of course, is also the date when Oginga Odinga took Jomo Kenyatta to open the Lumumba Institute, which was to be a training school for KANU officials. And in May 1965, on the graduation of the first class from the Lumumba Institute, they made the mistake, a fatal mistake, I think, looking back, to seize control of KANU headquarters, to proclaim that the leadership of KANU, apart from Kenyatta and ODINGA, had all been dismissed, and to usher in a left-wing platform. That event, May 1965, marked in many ways the end of Jaramogi's personal relationship with President Kenyatta. At the same time, of course, you have the rumors about the Russian ship providing weapons and supplies, being shadowed by the Royal Navy, and coming into the port of Mombasa. In fact, of course, it arrived first in Dar es Salaam. If there were any weapons, they were unloaded, and then subsequently made its way into Mombasa, where it was quarantined, it was searched, government ministers were searched, and so on. And that was the final blow. And we can see that by the issuing the following month of Sessional Paper number 10, the famous commitment in Kenya to African socialism. And it being quite clear that African socialism in Kenya represented something very different from African socialism and the Arusha Declaration and Ujamaa in Tanzania. It was much more friendly to capitalism. It marked, if you like, the culmination of the final blow to the Jaramogi standing inside the inner circles around Kenyatta. But having said all that, I want to refer to what Michael Chege said. And I want to talk in particular about the Information Research Department at the Foreign Office and its dirty tricks section, the Special Editorial Unit, which in these crucial years, 1964-65, produced 4 black operations against ODINGA. The first of which, in September 1965, saw the publication of a story, revolution document in Kenya in the Daily Telegraph, which had allegedly been issued by something called the People's Front of East Africa, and which alleged that Jaramogi was to be brought to power by a recently formed People's Revolutionary Socialist Party. This story was completely concocted by the British, and it sent out 80 copies, which it hoped would be caught and published in the press. In fact, there was a major story in the Daily Telegraph which wanted to get back at Jaramogi for expelling their correspondent from Nairobi. And there were other fabrications, other pieces of what we would now call fake news, claiming that he was a tool of the Chinese, and so on. The story of British propaganda operations in Kenya is a reminder that the days of a declining empire were not as much pomp and circumstance as deception, disinformation, and dirty tricks. At its heart was an effort by London to continue to exert control over a former colony well after it had become independent. And Jaramogi was the great victim. The 4th, 5th, and 6th phases I won't really talk about, they're well known. There's the KPU phase, 1966 to 69. There's the era of detention and house arrest and the failed political comeback in 1980, 1982. 2 decades, really, of frustration and years in the wilderness. And finally, you have the campaign for multi-party politics. If Ford had not split, if Kenneth Matiba had not pulled it asunder, they might well have won. They already had 63 seats in the 1992 election. If you combine Mutembei and Jaramogi's vote, it comes to 42% compared to the 36% by Daniel Arap Moi. But in all probability, of course, the election would have been rigged even more. There would have been even greater violence. But I want to end by giving you a thought. If the Jaramogi and Ford had won, and Ford had remained united, and Jaramogi had become Kenya's third president in January 1963, Kenneth Matiba would have succeeded to the presidency on January the 20th, 1994, 30 years ago today.
Okay, thank you so much, David.
Would have been very different.
The subsequent speakers to hold on to the 5 minutes limit. We shall request you subsequently to send us these papers, even the ones that have been given here today, so that we can have a follow-up publication of this 30 years memorial of Jaramogi. I know we have a lot to say, but it is now 5 o'clock in the afternoon, evening in Kenyan time, and we still have one more panel to go through. So I'll try to make it as short as possible for the remaining speakers. My friend John Lonsdale from University, can we hear from you the next 5 minutes? And then you can send us your speech so that we can publish it. John?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very grateful indeed to have been asked to attend this meeting.
John?
And also greatly honoured. And I'm delighted. Family from many distinguished contributors. I will speak very briefly. My former student, David Throop, is not named for his conciseness. I shall be very much more concise than him. I just want to take up what others have said about Odinga's rootedness. I met him once only, a long, long time ago, when I was a research student at Kisumu in 1963, when Odinga, as others, were campaigning. He was very busy, he swept by, I managed to say hello, and that was about it. But the point I want to make is that the person I found most interesting to talk to around Kisumu in 1963 was a wonderful old man.
Recording in progress.
And John Paul Alola was the farmer at what used to be called the native farm at Kibos. He was, I think, Odinga's business mentor in founding the Luo Thrift and Trading Corporation and the bus company. So that Odinga grew up, I think, in an atmosphere of extraordinary intellectual depth and interest, surrounded by people like John Paul Alola, a generation older than him. And I think that Alola, he showed me cuttings he had made of the East African Standard in the 1920s. He kept up with settler politics. He showed me letters that he had written as an agricultural instructor in, I think, 1914, complaining to the district commissioner that the Luo chiefs were not planting the kind of seeds that he was recommending. Odinga was himself a great man, but he was, I think, the child of great people. And I think that if we really want to understand him, then we need to understand a great deal more and record a great deal more about how the Luo themselves responded in such an extraordinarily creative way to the challenges of colonial rule. I want people like John Paul Alola to be remembered as much as Odinga. With that, I will hand it back to other people who remember very much more about Odinga than I do, a man I have always admired. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, John. Very much like you, concise and to the point. Please say hello to your colleagues in Cambridge. Now, let me turn to John Kamau. John is a journalist, but currently is doing postgraduate work in Toronto. Has done a lot of archival work on Kenyan politics and economics. John, please, can you come on?
Thank you. I hope you can hear me all.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you so much, and I'm very happy for the Odinga family for organizing this panel and also these meetings. I'll be quite quick. I've done quite some work on Jaramogi, and one thing that I always say is that we need to understand Jaramogi within the wider framework of international black thinkers, the intellectuals, and the activists who are emerging to question the legitimacy of colonial rule and the racism that was existing, and the perception of blacks as backward. And he was in the league of great visionaries like Kwame Nkrumah, Kenyatta, Abdel Nasser, Julius Nyerere, all people who are against the creation of an equal society. And I tend to look at him from that international perspective, because the kind of he was engaging in fighting against a system of domination and exploitation. And if you listen keenly to him, and if you read his book, Not Yet Uhuru, you're going to see that this is not the story of Kenya alone. It is a story of unfinished business of liberation in Africa. And having been born at a time when the sun was never setting on the empire, I think he took it as his duty to make sure that by the time of his death, the sun will have set on the empire. But also, the empire also struck back, and Professor David Thorpe has talked about the kind of response in which the empire did. And those who look at the propaganda system and the way to act with the British intelligence, I think having failed to create Jaramogi to become a royalist or to become in their own image, to create a man in their own image, they turned against him, and they made sure that they turned against him, and they made sure that the only thing that they could do was to satanize ODINGA, the way they satanized everybody else who was against the empire. And to do this, I think we need to reflect so much on the works of the Information Research Department and their data campaigns in Africa and in other places where they started this misinformation campaign. And that's what worries me, is that we fell into this trap of this misinformation. And even up to this moment, we are still trapped into some of the politics of this misinformation and the black propaganda, which was started by the British. And they forced us to start looking inward to an extent that a great nation like Kenya would think on the politics of genital modification, would think about the politics of genital modification as one of the ways in which to determine leadership. And this, I find that to be quite absurd for a great nation like Kenya. And again, when you look at the workings of the black propaganda, of what even the group has talked about it, the fake news and propaganda articles, there's a new book by Jim Barnes on one of the MI5, MI6 personnel who was working in Nairobi. His name was Walter Bell. And this book, which was released this year, it talks about how Walter Bell started working with Jomo Kenyatta. Kenyatta didn't know so much that he was being fine-tuned for some of this propaganda. And Walter Bell worked so much with Kenyatta. And part of the misinformation about the coup, ODINGA coup and all that, it reaches Kenyatta's desk. And even the papers by the People's Liberation, like Kenya Socialist Party, most of these propaganda papers, they reach Kenyatta. And he started being suspicious of ODINGA. And so a wedge is being created through this machinery. The other thing which we fail sometimes to remember is that ODINGA is an internationalist. He had set up what was known as the Kenya office in Cairo. And few people recall the Kenya office in Cairo. And this is where he was reaching out to international figures like Abdel Nasser for help in the Kenya's liberation. And we had people like Odhiambo Okello, Owera Abido, Abdul Karungo, Ngunyi. All these people were working towards emancipating the Black Africa, and they were with the help of Abdul Nasser. So we find that Jaramogi was a deliberate internationalist, deliberate in that he was reaching out to all those people who could help. And that is why you find his friends included people like Kwame Nkrumah, Tito of Yugoslavia, Mao, Khrushchev, all these people, if you read his book, they had meetings with him. And the other thing which I want to touch quite briefly, and I know if we had time we could have talked about it, is about the Jaramogi airlifts. When we talk about airlifts, people are always talking about the US airlifts.
Okay, thank you so much, John.
Okay, thank you so much.
There's an announcement to be made here, please. Can you make a quick announcement?
Thank you, Prof. I wish to remind that we are here on a very important intellectual discourse. All movement behind the dignitaries must stop. Madam, you cannot be selling calendars at this time. That one is not possible. All security officials, people are seated behind you for a good reason. You can't be standing in front of people who are seated. God has given us a sound mind and we must use it, especially here. Kindly, Calvo, kila mtu aliyesimama hapo aondoke. Na wewe mzee uliyesimama mbele ya kamera, tunakuomba uketi. Na tusalie watulivu, tusikilize maswala yanayozungumziwa hapa. Professor.
Thank you very much. We have the last speaker on Zoom, Professor Robert Mason of West Virginia, and I'm requesting Robert to observe the 5-minute rule because we have our last panel yet to come, and it's already 5:10. Thank you very much, Bob.
I will go back to advice. Starting just by recalling the times that
Can we, Robert, down, please?
Yes.
Those people that doing, please, can you go out or keep quiet and sit down, please? Please respect us as we respect you. Tafadhali. Tafadhali. Okay, John, Robert, please.
Thank you. First, honored the speech he gave in Kisumu, sponsored by the Gary Extra Mural program, and of courses in Western Kenya, and shared the platform with Musa Maramba. And this is the first time I've seen ODINGA in person, in contrast between he and Maramba in their public speaking address and their message to us as to the future education of Kenyans is quite a stark contrast. I've never forgotten it. And the message he said was, of course, we need to focus on an education that reflects the people of Kenya, that is the majority in Kenya, based on the colonial, of course, education completely the African one. Second time I met him was at the friendly soccer match that was based on colonial education completely the African one. Second time I met him was at the friendly soccer match that was arranged between North Nyanza and Central Nyanza to welcome Kenyatta and ODINGA to Western Kenya. First time Kenyatta visited, Jomo Kenyatta visited as Prime Minister. I had the opportunity to shake hands with him then. And thirdly, when I returned to Kenya in 1968-69 to carry out dissertation research, I was really looking for a place to stay. And the apartment in America House on Union English, which some of you headquarters as well as the police in obvious and less obvious. Anyway, only one time did I get threatened to be taken to the Central Police Station for going into the building where KPU was. The example I would like to give would follow up on what Professor David talked about, the 1958 stick to the budget.